So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a really exciting and fun night ahead of us learning more about Dante and his writing. And thank you to our sponsors who you see here on the screen. And I'm gonna come back. There we go. My name is Caitlin Shea. I am the Events and Media Director for Walt Whitman Birthplace Association. And if you're not familiar with us just yet, we are a museum located in Huntington, New York, where you can tour the house that Walt Whitman was born in 202 years ago. So you can come in person and see us there and take a tour. And you can also join us virtually, which you're doing right now. I'm going to tell you about some of our events. We have some in-person events planned as well. So we're really excited to be starting that back up again after a long time of not being able to. And I always want to start every single event by saying thank you so much to everyone who's able to donate for these events. You've made this possible. And we love meeting so many new people. Even something small like $5 that you might spend on a cup of Starbucks coffee actually does make a huge difference for us. So thank you for any amount that you're able to donate. And we love having your presence as well, just joining us like this. A lot of you I see almost every week. It's amazing. So thank you so much for all of that support. It means multitudes to us. I very briefly want to tell you we have 5 events this week. Some of them were rescheduled and we ended up with 5, which is wonderful. But I just want to give you a little brief overview of what those 5 events are. Of course, we're here tonight with Cliff for this Dante event. Tomorrow morning, the America's Poetry Festival will be in person at the birthplace, and you can join in person or virtually. I'm going to be sharing a link very soon that you'll be able to sign up for it, either in person or virtually. And it's poetry of the Latin America. So some of the poems are in Spanish and then they're read in English. It's a really exciting event. This is I believe our 9th time hosting it in the birthplace. So it's very exciting. On Saturday, we have 2 events. In the morning, we have a tour of Stony Brook Village with Andrew Rimby that will be virtual or in person, and it's imagining Whitman in Stony Brook Village. So we're not sure if Whitman actually visited, but a lot of the buildings there are from about 200 years ago. So if he did, he would have seen all of these buildings. That's one of our great tours with Andrew Rimby. He's a PhD student studying Whitman, so he's incredible at explaining Whitman and his poetry to us. Then in the afternoon, we have our event. It's Latinx poetry with George Wallace, who is our writer in residence. It's a series, it's a discussion series. It meets virtually on Zoom, and you can sign up. There's readings and films that you will watch or read separately from the discussion group. Then you'll come and discuss those films and books, and you'll be able to talk more about Latinx issues, cultural, religious, and folk rituals, things like that. It's a really wonderful, George has done this a few times with us. He chooses a topic that we learn so much more about, and we're able to discuss it with a lot of new people. So we hope you join us for that on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we have art and poetry conversations with Karen Demaro. I will also be co-leading that series. It's 3 Sundays, and basically you come to the birthplace, it's in person, and you will work on creating paintings that incorporate text, incorporate poetry. We had it virtually, it was very successful, everyone loved it, so we wanted to bring it back in person. So I hope you can join us for one or more of these spectacular events. All right, so without further ado, I know it's a lot to take in. I will be putting that link in the chat very soon, so you can investigate all of these things. But let's jump into our event right now. It's my pleasure to introduce Cliff Bleidner. Cliff Bleidner writes haiku poetry and has received recognition among local writers as a distinguished poet and organizer in the Long Island poetry community. Yeah. He's a co-founder and co-coordinator. Oh, I'm just gonna remind everyone to mute. Sorry, I can hear. Okay, there we go. Co-founder and coordinator of the Performance Poets Association, PPA, Long Island's largest poetry organization. He also manages the annual PPA Poetry Contest, now in its 25th year. He has co-hosted PPA poetry events at more than a dozen different locations across Long Island. Due to his dedication to the PPA, it has been a successful outlet for many Long Island poets. Cliff also assembles the PPA Literary Review manuscript from the judge's decisions of submissions. The most recent publication is from 2020. Oh yeah, okay. All right, so I want to welcome Cliff Bleidner. Cliff, this is the third event that you've had with us. You are our Long Island Poet of the Year,
Someone is
2021.
still unmuted.
Yeah, someone is.
Still noisy.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, hold on. Okay, I think I figured it out. Okay, there we go. Let me start again. So Cliff Bleidner is our Walt Whitman Birthplace Association Long Island Poet of the Year 2021. We had a ceremony with him and a reading, which was amazing. So we were delighted to welcome him back for 3 different events, this being the third one. The first one was about haiku poetry. The second was about formal poetry. And you can find those events on our YouTube if you didn't catch them live. And we're so excited, Cliff. Thank you so much. I can't believe it's the third event already. I feel like I've been enjoying them every month. So it's all of a sudden coming to an end. But I'm going to hand things over to you now, Cliff. Thank you so much again.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. And I would like to thank the Birthplace again for this great honor of being Walt Whitman Birthplace Poet of the Year. And that I have to say up front that these are 3 introductory lectures to these subjects that I have really been interested in and have been studying for a long time. But I have no formal, no formal credits or anything, no formal credentials in them, but I'm just interested in these 3 subjects, and I've already done haiku, and I've already done formal poetry, which, like Caitlin said, is available. You can call it up on the Birthplace website, and this one is on Dante. And I first started to read about Dante in 1972, and I first started to try to write formal poems in 1977. Okay, and I first got introduced to haiku on a Saturday workshop in 1984. Okay, so I've been at these things a while, on and off. And this is the 700th anniversary of Dante's death. And I will start with the brief bio of him. That Dante was lived from 1265 to 1321, and he was just about 56 years old, which is a good long life for those times. And that he grew up in the culture of Italy, and as a young man, what young men did in those days, and much do these days, that they wrote songs and they wrote poems and they played instruments. And he was involved in that, but he was also serious. He was involved in study of the law, joined an apothecary guild, and got involved in the politics of Florence. That's his native community. In these times, Italy was not unified. Italy doesn't get unified, I think, until the 1900s with Garibaldi. That's another story. But we have a map of what Italy looked like in 1300, which is basically what we're going to be studying. So if you look at this and pinch it out, Italy, the shape of a boot, Sicily looking like some kind of thing it's kicking, that you have a bright yellow sock that goes about halfway up. Yeah, it's kind of blocking. If we can just get a picture of it. There are just some things appearing on the screen that are blocking it. But anyway, there's a bright yellow sock that looks like it's of Italy. And that is the Kingdom of Naples. That's the Kingdom of Naples. So Naples is about half the area of just about that whole peninsula sticking out into the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, and about half the size of Naples are the Papal States. That's the Pope's domain. That the Pope owned this this large province, and it's about half the size of Naples. Okay, and then that orange, the light yellow is the Papal States, and that orange, the smaller orange, is about half the size of the Papal States, is Florence, and that's Dante's home. That's where he grew up, and that was the culture that he grew up in. Okay, and like I said, he had artistic pursuits, and he had more serious pursuits career-wise, that joined an apothecary guild and got involved in the law. And for a couple of months, he was one of the 6 judges in Italy, one of the 6 magistrates or priors. So he had a career in politics. And before that, he was a soldier, and he was in the Battle of Campaldino, where there were 2 rival parties, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and the Guelphs defeated the Ghibellines or Ghibellines, and they were ousted from the city. Okay, and what happens a lot of times when there's only one political party present, they break into 2 pieces because they don't always agree with one another. Politics being what it is. So the Guelphs broke up into the black Guelphs and the white Guelphs. And Dante and his friend Guido Cavalcanti and many others were white Guelphs. And they had, kind of arch enemies politically. And some of them were the Donatis, whom Dante married one of the women. It was a very large clan, so it wasn't directly related to the powerful Donatis, but it was all in there. So that was kind of the climate that he lived in, and so that's kind of the political side, and I'll return to it. That on the other side, on the romantic side, he's like I said, it was the era of arranged marriages, so he was betrothed to Gemma Donati, and they got married when he was 18. So he's 9 years old. He's 9 years old, and his family, the Alighieri's, get invited to a party given by the Portinaris, and the Portinaris and the various other families. They're having a good time and everything. And Dante, at the young age of 9 years old, he's actually 9 years old, and he catches first sight of Beatrice, or Beatrice, or Beatrice. That's all the same name. Not to be confusing, that he is infatuated with her. I mean, he's a 9-year-old kid, and he's beginning to notice girls, and it just ends at that. And then at 18 years old, that's when she's walking down the street, and he's 18 years old, like I said, and she's between 2 other older women, and she smiles at him and gives her greeting, and hello, Dante, and he falls hopelessly in love with her. So that's the nicer side of things. So continuing with the political side, that there's tension between the Guelphs, and there's tension between the surrounding provinces, and even tension between the Pope. The Pope was more like a statesman or a general sometimes, that he was involved in it too. And there's a delegation that Dante's part of, and he's sent to the Vatican to negotiate a peace. And this delegation thinks that they have negotiated a peace. Okay, but on their way back, they find out that behind their back, Pope Boniface VIII, who they negotiated a peace with, had the city taken over by the Black Guelphs, and the white Guelphs were now criminals and they were ousted. So that's the times that he lived in. And when you can't trust the Pope, who can you trust? So that's how it went on. And so I can only focus on two of the major works of Dante, and that's La Vita Nuova, his youthful work, and the Divine Comedy. So let me put the phone up, and I'm going to read to you all briefly from the La Vida Nuova, and that means the new life. So the first part is very short. In the book of my memory, that's the big book, the book of his memory, after the first pages, which are almost blank, there is a section headed Incipit Vita Nuova. Beneath this heading, I find the words which it is my intention to copy into the smaller book, or if not all, at least their meaning. So he can't convey the complete experience of being Dante Alighieri, not that complete experience, but he can convey what's important here. And he says that 9 times the heaven of the light had revolved in its own movement since my birth, and almost returned to the same point when the woman whom my mind beholds in glory first appeared before my eyes. That was the meeting with Beatrice. She was called Beatrice by many who did not know what it meant to be called this. She had lived in this world for the length of time, and he goes on to saying that she was at the beginning of her 9th year when he was near the end of his. And she was dressed as an 8-year-old girl in this very decorous and delicate crimson, tied with a girdle and trimmed with a manner suited to her age, her tender age. She's an 8-year-old girl. So he is, paraphrasing here, he is infatuated by her. That he is beginning to notice girls. Excuse me, my my voice was going. Okay, so I'm going to go to chapter 3. When exactly 9 years had passed since this gracious being appeared to me, as I have described, so now he's 18. It happened that on the last day of this intervening period, this marvel appeared before me again, dressed in purest white, walking between 2 other women of distinguished bearing, both older than herself. As they walked down the street, she turned her eyes toward me, where I stood in fear and trembling, and with her ineffable courtesy, which is now rewarded in eternal life, she greeted me. She gave her his greeting. And that's the most important thing for him, his greeting. And again, in the age of arranged marriages, he couldn't, he couldn't date her or or, or even let it know. He's like a young love-struck kid, and he can't let anybody know of his crush. And such was virtue of her greeting that I seemed to experience the height of bliss. It was exactly the 9th hour of the day when she gave me her sweet greeting. As this was the first time she had ever spoken to me, I was filled with such joy that my senses went reeling. I had to withdraw from sight of others, so I returned to the loneliness of my room and began to think about this gracious person. As I thought of her, I fell asleep, and a marvelous vision appeared to me. In my room, I seemed to see a cloud of color of fire, and in the cloud, a lordly figure, frightening to behold, yet in himself it seemed to me he was filled with a marvelous joy. He said many things of which I understood only a few. Among them were the words, ego dominus tuus, I am your master. In his arms, I seemed to see a naked figure sleeping, wrapped tightly in a crimson cloth. Gazing intently, I saw it was she who had bestowed her greeting on me earlier that day. In one hand, the standing figure held a fiery object, and he seemed to say, Vida cor tuum. And that was, behold your heart. He's holding Dante's heart in his hand. After a little while, I thought he awakened her who slept and prevailed on her to eat the glowing object. Eat the glowing object in his hand. Reluctantly and hesitatingly, she did so. A few moments later, his happiness turned to bitter grief, and weeping, he gathered the figure in his arms, and together they seemed to ascend into the heavens. I felt such anguish at their departure that my light sleep was broken, and I awoke. On reflecting, I realized at once the vision that appeared to me in the 4th hour of the night, that is the first of the last 9 hours of the night. Those numbers are important. Pondering what I had seen in my dream, I decided to make it known to a number of poets who were famous at that time. I had already tried my hand at the art of composing in rhyme. He's quite good already. I decided to write a sonnet in which I would greet all love's faithful servants, and so requesting them to interpret my dream. So I described what I had seen in my sleep. This was the sonnet beginning to every captive soul. So he's narrated this happening, and now he's going to give us a sonnet that he wrote to it. To every captive soul and lover, into whose sight this present rhyme may chance, that writing back each may expound its sense. Greetings and love, who is their Lord, I offer. Already of those hours, a third was over, wherein all stars display their radiance, when lo, love stood me before in my trance. Recalling what he was fills me with horror. Joyful love seemed to me in his keeping. He held my heart, and in his arms there lay my lady in a mantle wrapped and sleeping. Then he awoke her, and her fear not heeding, my burning heart fed to her reverently. Then he departed from my vision weeping. So that's an Italian sonnet, and the octave goes A, B, B, A, the rhymes, A, B, B, A, B, B, A. And they never really set what the sestet was going to be, but this one goes C, D, C, D, C, D. And they can be C, D, E, C, D, E, or various combinations. So after that, he goes into a prose commentary. This sonnet is divided into 2 parts. In the first, I extend a greeting and ask for a reply. In the second, I convey what it is that requires a reply. The second part begins already of those hours. This sonnet drew replies from many who had different opinions as to its meaning. He sent it to a lot of people. Among those who replied was someone whom I call my closest friend, and they believe that's Guido Cavalcanti. He wrote a sonnet beginning, "In my opinion, you beheld all virtue." Our friendship dated from the time he learned of that. I was the one who sent him the sonnet. The true meaning of the dream was not then perceived by anyone, but now it is perfectly clear to the simplest reader. So what provoked Dante to write this? He enclosed his sonnets and his canzone into this prose commentary called the Vita Nuova. What prompted that was he saw Beatrice when he was 8, when she was 8 and he was 9, and he saw her again when he was 18, and he was going to see her again at 27. Unfortunately, she passed away. She died at about 25 years old. So he was greatly grieved by this, and she died in around the year 1290 as a young lady. So, and she was married to a banker. She was in an arranged marriage too. And so, in his grief for her loss, that he wouldn't see her anymore, he wove all of those. He wrote a whole bunch of sonnets and canzones and poems to her. He wove them into this prose narrative, and he also put commentary of his own poetry in it. So he made this work out of it. He put his poems into a framework, and he had that mind that could deal with minute details and then work on a grand scale. So it's already appeared here before he even gets the idea to write the comedy, and he calls it his comedy, and which means strictly that the strict definition of comedy is people overcome circumstances in life, and a tragedy is circumstances in life, overcome people. It doesn't mean slapstick or anything like that, but the whole work is kind of structured this way, and I can't go into it too much further because time will not permit. But what happens is, in this narrative, is he avoids where she is and just loves her from afar, and accidentally he comes too close to her, almost face to face, and it's almost like Superman with kryptonite, that he just becomes that he just falls to pieces, that he can't bear. He loves her dearly, but he can't bear her presence. And he wrote this canzone about these women he approached somewhat later, who were curious about that. And he first made sure his lady wasn't there, and he had a conversation with them, and one of the questions was, "What is this love of yours that you cannot bear her presence?" And they kind of didn't understand it, and they were giggling, and some of them rose above that and had meaningful conversations with him about what these feelings meant. And in the era arranged marriages, it was probably common that you didn't marry who you fell in love with. That these crushes were just forgotten about eventually. So one time he was in church, and he was looking at her and looking at Beatrice and smiling, and this other woman turned around who was right between them, and he called her the screen lady, that she thought he liked her, and she was very flattered by that. So he actually created created this ruse to throw people off the track, because I guess, you know, maybe they were ribbing him or something, but he didn't want, he wanted to keep this secret that how much he loved this lady. But that's kind of the theme of the whole thing. But then she actually does pass away, and he writes, you know, he writes about that. But what I have to conclude this part of it with is, after, this is the last part of the Vita Nuova, where he says, after this sonnet, there appeared to me a marvelous vision in which I saw things which made me decide to write no more of this blessed one until I could do so more worthily. And this is Dante saying, I can't do it yet. I'm not good enough. And I don't know if I'll ever be good enough. And to this end, I apply myself as much as I can, as she indeed knows. Thus, if it shall please him by whom all things live, that my life continue for a few more years. That means, you know, if God permits it, I hope to compose concerning her what has never been written in rhyme of any woman. And then may it please him, who is the Lord of courtesy, that my soul may go to see the glory of my lady, that is of the blessed Beatrice, and who now in glory beholds the face of him who is blessed forever. And Dante's vision of heaven, which he does get to in the Paradiso, is there's this stadium full of people, infinite in number, of course, and they're all in God's presence, and they're all with him forever. And they're all one-on-one with him. And it's really a divine mystery. So that's what happens, and that's what happens in the youthful work. So he breaks that ends. He breaks that off, and he's not ready to write the comedy. And when he starts to compose the comedy, he has to decide how he's going to present this. So what happens in the interim is, like I said before, that he negotiated a peace with the Pope, him and his delegation, and it was all false. That they were thrown out of Florence, and he could never return. It turned out that, you know, he had to pay a fine and witness never holding public office again, and various humiliations, and his funds were seized, and his 3 male sons had to go into exile when they became of adult age. So this is a life of a lot of loss and a lot of lack. And we probably wouldn't have had the comedy had he been, you know, a successful statesman and jurist and politician. He probably would have not had the time to write it, because what he undertook fills 3 paperback books and goes for 14,000 lines, and is in poetry, and each rhyme appears 3 times, and he walks his universe of the next world after you die from the beginning to the end. So that's what he does sometime after 1300. There are varying accounts that they say that a couple of weeks before his death, he finished the Paradiso, the last part of the comedy, and other accounts now say that he had it completed 3 years before he died. But whatever it was sometime after 1300 that he composed this. So if he had to wait, he had to let that go for a while, because he wasn't equal to the task. He was just planning the structure of it. So what he does in the interim is he continues to write poems and songs, and he criticizes them himself in a work called Il Convivio, and exchanges letters and poems with all of his colleagues, all of his friends, and he writes, and you know that what's going on is he's composing in the vernacular, and that and you know the language, the internet, basically the internet of Europe was Latin. If you wanted to reach all of Europe, you wrote in Latin, and he knew how to do that, but he didn't understand if you wrote these beautiful poems to these women that couldn't read Latin, where was that? You were just writing for other poets. You were just writing for other guys. So he felt that the common language, the Italian that everybody uses, and that's what he wrote this treatise on the vernacular tongue, De Vulgari Eloquentia, and that's what he maintains in that treatise, that he talks about the evolution of language from various sources, and that's what he says. I use the language that everybody uses. I can't say what that is, but it's the language that everybody knows. And even today, when somebody uses obscure words in poetry, and we're listening at a reading, it throws us off. We, we're not in the narrative anymore. We're not understanding anymore if we have to stop and think what a word means. So that's what he was trying to do. That he was elevating the local language of Italian into art. And he was also, with La Vita Nuova and with the Il Convivio, he was criticizing his own poetry. And that and Ezra Pound credits him with inventing literary criticism. But I think it was more or less something that just arose between the poets when they began to communicate like that. So we can a number of treatises and are kind of left incomplete. Il Convivio is incomplete. De Vulgari Eloquentia is incomplete, but with what he does, Il Convivio is also called a banquet. That's the English name for it. That it's basically a framework of knowledge with his philosophy in it, and his poetry in it, and criticism of his own work. So that's broken off, and De Vulgari Eloquentia is broken off, and a number of other things are broken off by the time about 1302 comes. He's in exile. He has to go into exile because of the politics. And this is someone who has lost a lot and almost nowhere to turn. He has patrons because he's well connected politically in a lot of areas, and he stays with a number of people for the remaining 25 years of his life or whatever, and which was hard. He was involved in sometimes in plots to with the white Guelphs to retake Florence, but they never got anywhere or anything. And then finally he just had to let go of the whole thing. And then somewhere around, somewhere towards 1300 and 1310, that he actually begins to write the Inferno, the beginning of the comedy. And how he does that is the last epic poet was Virgil, and he wrote the Roman epic, the Aeneid. And Virgil's hero, Aeneas, is a young is a young man, is actually a Trojan, and he survives the Trojan War and makes his way to Rome, and that is that's part of the epic, and that's how Virgil connects himself with the Greek myths, with the Greek epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the way Dante connects himself is he uses Virgil as his guide for most of the Divine Comedy, for most of his comedy. And the mythology that he creates here is that the world that Dante lives in, he's lost all hope, that he's in a dark wood of error, that he doesn't know where to go, doesn't know what to do. And when you can't, and like I said before, when the Pope betrays you, who can you trust? That's the kind of world that he lived in. So the mythology he creates is that Beatrice in the highest heaven, right near the Virgin Mary, sees that he's in trouble, and she sends a shade of herself into limbo to contact Virgil and tell him how worried she is about Dante, that he's going to let his resentments destroy him and possibly wind up in hell. So she's very fearful about what's going to become of him. So this part of Beatrice, who finds Virgil in limbo, and Virgil is classified as a virtuous pagan, that he gets to be in limbo, and limbo is not where people are tortured. Limbo is a pleasant place. So she descends and sends Virgil to go and get Dante and save him from a fate worse than death. And so he has to be taken through the three realms of the next world. And hell is the realization of sin, and purgatory is the renunciation of sin, and heaven is the good stuff, is living free of sin, being safe, being well. So I guess we should start with the image of the Inferno. Caitlin? Yes. Okay. So this is what hell looks like. And I'm going to have to look close at this. All right, so there's the vestibule of hell. And that, Virgil approaches Dante and tells him who he is. And Dante's very respectful of that. And he tells him what his task is and who sent him. And so they find running around the vestibule of hell are the opportunists, those people that only chase the banner of their own advantage. So they took no position in life, so they're given no place in the next world. It's as simple as that. Dante, being a judge, being an ex-judge, feels 100% and thoroughly competent about placing these people wherever he cares to. Okay, and there are circles in hell. So the first circle is, well, they have to get across there are 4 rivers of hell. So they cross the river of Acheron. That's the first river of hell, and Dante doesn't want to waste any narrative time on it, so he winds up fainting during that. And when they get when they get to limbo, he meets many people from classical history and from other places that as they get to Limbo, Homer, Ovid, and Lucan approach Dante and Virgil, and they welcome Virgil back, and because he's been gone briefly, and they receive Dante well, and they make him one of them. So Dante has no compunctions no reserves about his own poetry. He knows he's good, and he sees no reason for false humbleness. He doesn't say, "Oh no, no, not me. You guys are great." He doesn't do anything like that. He just accepts it. So circle 3. Let's see. Wait. Okay, circle 2, where the lustful are punished, and it's almost like their tempestuous love affair. From I think that comes from Shakespeare, and that's these souls are blown around by a vicious wind in a chasm at high speed, and they're their pain. It's a painful thing, and they don't think, most of the souls in hell, or all of them, don't really think they should be there, because they have not repented, and they died, and then it's over. You cannot repent once you've been sent to hell. So they have to deal with the loss of heaven and the pain of hell. So there's Paolo and Francesca, that are two souls that come to talk to Dante and Virgil, and they were reading the King Arthur. They were reading the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. They were reading some literature about that. Paolo and Francesca, and Paolo was the male, and Francesca was married, and she was reading it with this man that wasn't her husband, and they weren't really reading all of the story. They were just reading the good parts, where Guinevere wound up with Sir Lancelot, and we know that story, that they had this love affair. And then she says, we read this, and basically only the sexy parts. And then she says, and we read no further that day. And Paolo is just standing beside her, and he just cries incessantly at the loss of eternal happiness. So that there's no room. There's either the left side or the right side. There's no on the fence. That the time that they could have saved themselves is over. And most of the souls in hell are like that. And the husband found them together, and he killed them both. And he's further down in hell, where the murderers are. So there's it's basically the 7 deadly sins that are purged in hell. And as you go further down, that there are these circles, and they're separated by a wide abyss from circle 8 and circle 9. The first 7 circles are above, and then there's a big drop to circle 8 and circle 9, and basically there's this 7-2-1 formula that Dante uses, seven of one kind. There's 7 circles above the abyss and two circles below the abyss. And then one circle different. So that's how that goes. The 7 above, the 2 below, and the one that's different. And the one that's different is where Satan is all the way at the bottom. And Satan is presented as a 3-headed monster, and he keeps trying to get. He keeps trying to fly out of the ice that he's freezing himself in with the wind that he's creating. So the ultimate in evil is just stupidity that is depicted by Dante, and he's chewing on 3 souls, and Satan is the greatest betrayer. Okay, he betrayed God, and the second greatest betrayer is being chewed in one of the mouths, and that's Judas, who betrayed Christ. And the third, and the other 2 mouths of Satan, that the other 2 souls that are being chewed on are Cassius and Brutus, because they betrayed the Roman Empire, which Shakespeare wrote about. So that's how all of these, the worst sin is the betrayer of benefactors. That's what Dante represents as the worst. Okay, I don't have time to go through the rest of it in detail, but we can go to the Purgatory. Okay, and the Purgatory is a place where there's hope. That there's 2 levels of anti-purgatory, and the first one is if you pledged yourself to God on your deathbed. Okay, if it was your dying breath and you pledged yourself that you want to be saved, you will be saved. And if you're 80 years old, you're going to spend 30 times that approaching the mountain of purgatory. So 30 times 80 is 2,400 years. It's going to take you to get to the foot of the mountain, just the foot of the mountain. Okay, and then you have 7 levels. It's a 7-level mountain, and that's the 7 deadly sins. But this time there's hope. It's hell turned upside down, and they're on these ledges. It takes 100 years to purge. And on these ledges, there are examples of the opposite of each deadly sin, like pride is the opposite is humility. They're given examples of humility, and greed, they're given examples of generosity. So there's an opposite, and sloth, be active, do things. So there are examples to inspire these souls to purge, to get rid of it, and if you have to purge on every one of those levels, and you've taken 80 years to give yourself to God, you're going to spend over 3,000 years in purgatory. Okay, but once you do that, you're in heaven, and then you're going to be in heaven forever. And and heaven forever, even 3 millennia is going to eventually seem minuscule, and a misspent life of 80 years would be totally forgotten. So that's like the overview of this. And on top of the mountain of purgatory is the Garden of Eden. that's where we once were as pre-lapsarian man, before Adam and Eve ate the apple of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and all the trouble started. That's where we would have, in the theory, that's where we would have been alive today, safe, happy, well, no COVID or anything. No, we wouldn't have to work from the sweat of our brow. We wouldn't have to endure sickness and death and whatever. So that was what we lost. And Virgil takes Dante through, all the way through hell, and they climb down Satan's leg, and they wind up standing up on the other side of Satan's leg too, and climb up to Purgatory, and climb up this mountain, and they get into the Garden of Eden, and then the heavenly pageant brings Beatrice to Dante to be led the rest of the way, and Virgil is quiet for a couple of cantos, and then he just turns his back and leaves, and he leaves before Dante even knows that he's gone, and I guess what we see from that is that they what does a goodbye mean between epic poets, that they'll always be together in one way or another. So when Beatrice takes over, they look upward after some pageantry in the Garden of Eden and some cantos in the Garden of Eden, and some poetic transformations, where the church turns into all kinds of hideous animals. The chariot of the church, because he's very angry at the church. So Dante and Virgil, Dante and Beatrice, they look at the sun as she tells him to, and all of a sudden the sun becomes brighter, bigger. And what happened was they left the earth, and they've gone up into the Paradiso. And if you could put that up, Caitlin. Okay, so this is what the universe looks like to Dante. It's the old Aristotelian universe, the Ptolemaic universe that leaked into Christianity, and it presents the heavens as spheres, and they knew the planets up to Saturn at the time, and there's the moon, Mercury, Venus, and the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then you have the sphere of fixed stars, and then you have the prima mobile, and that's the first source of motion, that the prima mobile gives motion to the other spheres. It's the source of motion. It's the source of time. So once they go beyond that, they journey beyond time and beyond motion. But what he learns that there are levels in heaven too. There are levels of being saved, and there are some that even against their will they were forced to commit sin, but still sin is sin. That they had no say in it, but still they're in heaven, but they're not as high as others. But they're all in heaven. They're all with God. They're all in that huge stadium, even though they just descend to these spheres of moon, Mercury, Venus, in order to converse with Beatrice and Dante. And he goes up to almost the highest heaven, and Beatrice isn't beside his side anymore. When he looks for her, Saint Bernard is there, and Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, that he was a clairvoyant, and he is going to assist him in the vision of God. And that is how Dante actually sees God. And Dante has the vision of God and experiences that, and of course, after he sees this vision, it's like he describes it so strangely when he first begins to see that there is a presence there, that the angels are swarming around God like flies around poop. That's a very strange metaphor or simile. But and then when he actually sees God, it's such an overwhelming experience that he cannot put it into words. This must ultimately fail, because who can describe God? Not even Dante, and he makes this lapse into silence. And the only thing he can do is just be returned to earth and walk out once more beneath the stars. And that word stars ends each canticle, each large part of the comedy. And also there's that 721 here too, that there are 7 spheres that are heavenly bodies, and then there are 2 different, which is the prima mobile and the fixed stars, and then there's one more, which is the Empyrean. That's what that word says, the Empyrean, where God is with all the saved souls forever. And that's how the comedy ends. So that's basically how this an overview of how this happened. And Dante actually invented the poetry that he uses for the comedy. It's called terza rima, triple metered rhyme. Each rhyme appears in at 3 times. So he's trying to make the poem look miraculous. Each canto of each canticle, he's trying to make it look miraculous in every way that can possibly be. So that actually starts with it starts with 2 lines that rhyme, and then there's let me just put this up. He starts with 2 lines that rhyme, and then this rhymes and this rhymes, and there's a new rhyme coming in here, and these 3. Then there's this, and a new one comes in. There's always room for a new one to come in after 2 and 2. But he needs the 2 to. He needs just a couplet to start it off. But once it's started off, it's self-perpetuating. And he carries that on for 14,000 lines. But there are more rhymes in Italian than there are in English. But the Divine Comedy has been translated into English. Even it's reproducible to a degree in English, and it has been done. And and it's it's one of the things that translators do. And translators don't translate these poems into English because poor Cliff only reads English. When a translator translates a poem, he wants to be where the writer was, and he finds out how the poem was constructed. That's what translators do. That's what they want to find out, and it makes them better. It makes them better poets, because when this has been translated so often, the Vita Nuova and the Divine Comedy, because poets make themselves better by doing exercises like this, that many of them are linguists, many of them know a number of languages. So that's basically it. That's an introduction. That's an introduction to what goes on. There's a review of his minor works. There's a review of the canticles of the comedy, and there's his numerology and the handouts. So it's good enough to get started if you would like to pursue this further.
All right. Then come back. Thank you so much, Cliff. I feel like that was an adventure through your storytelling. You told us that we would hitch a ride with Dante, Virgil, and Beatrice, and that's exactly what it felt like. We went all the way down and up again.
Right.
Thank you so much. We're going to have questions and answers and any comments that you have in just a moment. But first, I want everyone to unmute for a moment to give Cliff Bleidner a huge, well-deserved round of applause.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Cliff. All right, so if you'd like to come on camera to ask your question, you can just unmute and start talking. You can also type in the chat with any of your questions or comments.
A quick, wonderful workshop. But if you were to read the Divine Comedy, should you read it first without the annotations?
I would, as the first book on the comedy, I would get the John Ciardi edition of the mentor book, Inferno. I'd start with that.
Mm-hmm.
And as an introduction to the canto, it tells you what happens in the canto, and then it has a translation of the canto from in English, and it has notes at the end. So I would read that book from beginning to end. That's the most readable one, and it doesn't have the rhyme scheme.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, that the Ciardi doesn't have the exact rhyme scheme, but he has a lot of it, and I think that there's, what's her name, Dorothy L. Sayers also has a translation of the Divine Comedy, and her and she I believe duplicates the rhyme scheme.
Cliff, would you be able to read us a couple of examples of the 3-line rhymes so we could hear them?
Thank you.
See. Yeah.
Well, maybe you
don't-
can't read them in Italian, but you could read them in English.
Okay. Let me see. I would have to. I'd have to find something. I have to find something to. I need to just take a short break, though.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, so if that's inconvenient, don't worry about it.
I can send something to Caitlin that I have. That there's one canto that I outlined. It's the Lawrence Spinian translation.
Okay.
I outlined how he reproduces that triple metered rhyme in English.
Okay. I thank you so much. I studied Dante for a semester at the University of Buffalo decades ago. And we were immersed in the poetry, but not the structure. So you finally made sense of it all for me. After all these years, you gave it a context that now makes everything fit. And I have to say, the vividness of his descriptions in the Inferno, I have never forgotten, because you feel it so exquisitely and so vividly when you're reading his actual verse. He was a remarkable writer.
Yeah, that that reminds me of the when they visit, they're in deep hell,
Yes.
and I think it's in the eighth circle. The sowers of discord,
Mm.
that the people who want to foster disunity. That there's this Bertrand de Borns, and he was a troubadour actually, but his head is cut off,
Mhm.
and he has to go around that circle, and the wound heals, and he gets his head cut off again and again and again, and he holds his head up
Ah.
to speak to Dante and Virgil like he has a lantern.
Yes, it was images like that that are unforgettable. And there are plenty of people today who are heading toward that circle, I think. That very
Yep.
circle.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank
know,
you for your discussion tonight. It was wonderful.
Yep. So actually, if you put this into letters, it's if you would say, if you picture just two A's with a B in between,
Mhm.
and then a B follows those. It's A B A B, and then there's a room for a C, and then there's another B,
Yeah.
and then and that's how, and then the C is already there, so another C comes in, and then a D comes in, and the other C comes in.
Well, it certainly would help to know Italian in this case. It would really be an elegant thing to read. Yeah, it would really be amazing. But I don't. So
yeah, I don't either. So we have the luxury of so many poets translating Dante
yes.
in different ways, and different translations offer different things.
Was he well read in his time?
Yes, because he was a well-known author, that the Vita Nuova was well circulated, and his paper on the vernacular tongue, and his and his sonnets and his canzones.
And what was the church's reaction to this amazing piece of writing?
I'm not sure, but they probably just, they would say that's just his opinion of what the next world looked like from what the theologians figured out.
Okay.
It was all mapped out, that they, in different ways, the hell was mapped out from, and heaven was mapped out, with the Ptolemaic system, that most of heaven was mapped out, and he just had to add a few things, it being a Christian universe, and then he had to add a few things with with hell. But Purgatorio is probably the most creative he is, because he does that. He's free to kind of experiment. That's the most experimental part of the poem, is the Purgatorio, because there was less written about that.
Cliff, I happen to have a copy of the poem in Italian, and I could just read the first 3 lines, which show that rhyme, if you'd like.
Read the first 6.
Yeah, or maybe the first 10.
Yeah.
Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la dritta via era smarrita. Ahi quanto a dir qual era e cosa dura, esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte, che nel pensier rinnova la paura. Those are the first 6. I'll keep going. Tante è l'amare che poco è più morte, ma per trattar del ben chi vi trovai, dirò di altre cose che vi ho scorte. Io sono so ben redir come vintre, tanto era pien di sono a quel punto che la verace via abbandonai. That's the first 10 points.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard. You have to actually, whether you don't have to know Italian, but you can dope out the
Right.
rhymes.
Yeah.
Right.
I was able to do that with the Italian version of the Vita Nuova, and with the comedy, you can see how the rhymes and how plentiful the rhymes are.
I was a medical
Still,
student.
you have to.
I was
Still,
a
you have
medical
to be.
student in Italy.
Yeah.
And
What was that?
I was a medical student in Italy back
Okay.
40 years ago. And stupidly, I said, oh, well, now that I'm in Italy and have to learn Italian, maybe I'll pick up on some poetry. And I picked up the Divine Comedy. It was ridiculous. So after that, I started reading comics in Italian, and that was more helpful.
Oh.
Well, what I can do is, like I said, I photocopied a canto in Italian, and I photocopied the Lawrence Binion translation of one of the cantos and how the rhyme went, and I can send that material to Caitlin, and when the website comes up again, it can be sent.
Yes, I'm going to be sending out a lot of handouts to everybody as soon as our website is back up and running. So look for that in your email as soon as possible.
Thank you.
But it's yeah, I guess other people have, I haven't looked into it, but I'm sure other people have written in Terzarima, picked up that challenge since he used it so well, and a lot of people, they don't even look into that. But yeah, that's that he wrote sestinas, that they were well known, that they were known as the stony rhymes, that they were sent to they were about a woman named Pietra, and that's for stone.
Mm.
And that he wrote many other things, many other poems that weren't included in anything. And it's a great piece of history and art, just to we can't know everything, but if you choose one of these poetic greats as a mentor, the rewards are great.
Yes.
Yes. And we have a comment in the chat, Cliff, from Jennifer Wen, who is an amazing poet from Canada, who has joined us a few times for our open mics. And Jennifer says, one of the things I'm currently reading is the Divine Comedy, the Henry Francis Carey translation. I'm nearly done with Purgatory, and that was definitely helpful. A couple of comments. First, and it may be growing familiarity with the translation style, I have found Purgatory somewhat easier to follow than Hell, although Hell was fascinating in its awfulness.
Mhm.
Second, in addition to faith, of course, I have also found a significant aspect of the work as a whole to be is a political commentary on his times and recent history.
Mhm.
Yep. Yeah, it was. It was. He met many of the souls that he knew in life, and he placed Pope Boniface VIII in hell. He placed him upside down and head first in a anti-baptismal position, in a flaming
The ultimate revenge.
pot. Yeah, he placed his enemies in hell.
Yeah, Boniface was in a particularly bad spot, as I recall.
Yeah, he didn't last too long as Pope. The politics went against him too eventually.
Did
But,
Dante? Thank you very much, Cliff. Did Dante maintain his faith? Was he faithful to the church?
yes, he always believed in God and really really didn't turn away, but and to believe in the next world like he did. He realized that it was people that do bad things, that
Yes.
the faith and the word of God was good and pure, but it was people that kill in the name of God, that bomb abortion clinics and fly planes into buildings. That's an insult to religion. That's not religion. That's just terrorism all dressed up as something that it isn't. But that he never really lost his faith. He lived a life of a lot of pain and a lot of loss and a lot of lack. But we wouldn't have had the comedy had he become a successful statesman and lawyer and had that kind of a career.
He
It
kind
was
of beats the
just
church,
because he was exiled and had this time to write this.
just like Cervantes, was in jail for a long time and may not have written El Quixote if he wasn't in jail that long.
Right, right.
But
Oh,
Dante,
okay, I didn't know that about him.
Dante seems to have beaten the church at its own game because he is so meticulous about the theology,
Hmm.
very careful where he places people. There's the level of the flatterers, but there's a lower level for the prostitutes, which, not to be judgmental. He places the most famous prostitute from Rome. I guess the flatterers is below. He places her there because her sin was whenever her customers would ask her, "How was I?" she would tell everybody, "Oh, baby, you were the best." And I love how you make that moral judgment. But it's like that was at the time of indulgences. I guess the indulgences are still there, but so many prayers or so much money would get you out of so many days in purgatory, but they never told you how many days in purgatory you had to spend for any particular sin, which
Right.
is worse.
Right. Yeah. Well, he makes some decisions, that when he's in purgatory with Virgil, there's this saved soul called Statius that travels, that is, that has finished purging, and he rises and he travels along with Dante and Virgil for a while before he disappears. And there's no record. Statius was, I think he wrote the Thebaid, and that's I don't think it's an epic poem, but it's a long poem, and there's no record of him ever becoming a Christian. But we don't know everything, and Dante chose to put him there. Evidently, he read the Thebaid and he liked it, and he figured he can use the character of Statius. And that he's a Roman poet and he's saved. So, it's like we don't know everything. Not everything's recorded in history, but God knows everything. So he does that a couple of times to show that we're not the all-knowing.
He had fraud below violence, which I found kind of interesting. The fact that traitors are just about down at the bottom makes kind of sense, but I found that fraud being below violence I found that sort of interesting.
Yeah, I guess because he was betrayed a lot, that he placed that way below. But Satan was the ultimate betrayer.
Yeah, it's the fraud below violence that I thought was kind of odd.
Yeah.
Like you have the murderers higher up than fraud artists.
Yeah, well, I think that there were three kinds of the sins of bestiality. I think that the sins of bestiality are in are in the upper hell, and that is kind of confusing. The murder is the murder is there. That fraud is lower than that. But that's the way he's styled. I think that that fraud the betrayal, the betrayal and fraud are related to an extent. That you lied to somebody, that his congregation, his delegation that was lied to by Pope Boniface VIII, that was fraud, that was betrayal.
Fraud is a different kind of death. Murder is a physical death. A fraud is a death of a trust.
The soul, yeah.
Yes, of a soul, yes.
Yeah, so that could be it.
Was this the last thing he wrote? Or did?
I don't think we can really know that, but now that now they're maintaining that he could have finished the comedy as early as 1318.
Wow.
So he might have wrote some things afterward that were rhymes. And there's this debated thing, A Question of Water and Earth. It was about the height of the water and earth on the planet. It was like almost a scientific paper that some people, it's disputed whether he wrote it or not. But that's something that he wrote later, much later on.
Do you have anyone else who wants to jump in with questions or comments? Second. All right.
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
I have one question to Cliff. What order should we read these in?
Read them in, read Inferno first. And read everything with the synopsis and the translation and the footnotes of each canto. Go canto by canto. It's less confusing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I suggest with the Ciardi book, the Mentor book, but also very good is Dorothy L. Sayers. She wrote an excellent translation of the Divine Comedy, and I believe that the Terza Rima is reproduced there in English.
Hey, Caitlin, maybe you could get the Walt Whitman Center to somehow sponsor someone who would get a group together to read the Inferno.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Barbara. I like that a lot.
And maybe we could get all the Italian delis on Long Island to sponsor it or something. Someone thinks that's very funny, but I don't mean it derogatorily. I just mean there's enough people here who would be interested in, sponsoring Dante's studies,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the kind of thing I would like to read with a group of people rather than alone again. It would be interesting. It'd be fun.
Yes, I love that idea. We're always thinking of ways.
Yeah. I mean, you are a poetry center after all.
Right, exactly. Like tonight, we try to not just be Whitman. There's a lot of.
No, it's wonderful. It's great.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else want to jump in with any questions or comments?
Better yet, all the pizza places on Long Island.
Right. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I want to let Cliff take a little break. It's a lot to go through all those places with us. Big epic adventure, really, that we went on tonight. So thank you so much, Cliff. I'm sad that this is our last event with Cliff for this year anyway. Who knows about next year, but we've had 3 in a row. So it's been a pleasure, Cliff. So thank you so much for that. We really loved it. Let's do one more big round of applause for Cliff, please. Thank you, Cliff. And thank you everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's been an amazing night. And again, we have so many upcoming events. I just want to put that back in the chat if you want to join us for those. And you can always email me if you have questions, comments, like Barbara was saying, if you have any ideas for events, we love hearing that too. And our social media as well. So many of you reach out to us there, and we love hearing all your thoughts on other ideas that we could explore more in depth. So I hope you have a wonderful night, a wonderful almost weekend coming up. And I hope to see you again soon, virtually or in person.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Wonderful.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
All right, we will see you soon,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Good night.